So Graeme, I'm so glad you're here. I'm just so glad that you're here because you're number 3 and Sam is number 5. So it's good to just have somebody to keep Sam in a box, his feet slightly on the ground, because otherwise floating on.
It's 12 o'clock. Shall we roll the video?
Oh, now
on it.
You're gonna have to give me a second.
Are you ready to talk your way through it, Paul?
Yeah, he was so busy trying to wind me up that he's forgotten his.
I've forgotten my only job.
That's called karma.
Yes, it is. It is.
Or Vanma in his case.
You shut it off a little bit too early there.
Well, I had to do something wrong because otherwise Sam wouldn't have anything to take the mickey about.
It's now time for us to welcome our first guest speaker of today. Sam, are you doing introductions today? Not that this particular individual needs any.
I am indeed, although he doesn't need one, but yes. Shall I crack on?
Yes, go for it, Sam.
Okay,
yes.
All right. So our first guest, you may have heard of him. His name's Graeme Cooper. Graeme is a highly experienced professional and senior leader in energy, infrastructure and clean transport with over 2 decades working in the power, energy market and utility sectors, including renewable energy and onshore wind, solar PV and renewable heat. More importantly, he's a huge supporter of the EV Cafe and a friend to us all. Graeme has featured in so many top 100s. If I mentioned them all, I'd be here all day. But don't worry, he's listed all of them on his LinkedIn profile, in case you're wondering. And just yesterday was voted number 3 in the motor transport decarbonisation power player of 2022. Yeah, that's Graeme. Well, that's a bit of Graeme. He's a great supporter of our EV Cafe. We're lovely to have you again, Graeme. And the floor is yours.
Well, I feel humbled, actually, to be honest. Don't forget, I'm just the energy guy. You guys are doing all the clean and clever stuff and the transport stuff. The only thing, just commenting on the award thing, I was talking to my team yesterday actually. And do you know what's really nice is when something like motor transport, which is a very truck heavy, commercial vehicle fleet logistics business, an organization, recognizes somebody outside their sector. So for me, it's nice to be recognized, but it's nice that the trucking industry is now recognizing the importance of energy and vice versa. And so for me, it's not necessarily about the award in and of itself. It's that recognition. It's different sectors working together. So the collaboration piece that the whole EV Cafe stimulates is being borne out in the commercial world, which I think is really, really, really great. So, thank you for that. I was going to pick up on a few things, just mainly around the LEVI fund, but a bit more contextually as well, right? So there is often lots and lots of criticism that the government needs to do more, go faster. Often people confuse National Grid with being a government entity, which we're not, right? So we are a privately owned business. If you've got a pension, you're probably a shareholder, whether you know it or not. We've got 880,000 shareholders, and most of those shareholders are pension funds. So, when you look at your pension statement and there's the high risk stuff and the medium risk stuff and the low risk stuff, and you pick dependent on your age, we fall into that lower risk box, right? So anyway, so most of you, whether you know it or not, are probably shareholders of National Grid. So anyway, coming back to the point around the LEVI fund is a lot of people throw the challenge at governments that just says governments need to do more. Now, governments are great at stimulating markets, often not great at picking winners. But also people tend to just throw the problem at the government and say, well, just fix it. What we found worked really, really well is when government are given options. And one of the criticisms early on was money was given or funding was available to councils for the on-street charging fund. And many councils didn't take that up. And then there was a lot of frustration as to why was that not taken up. And we'd had various conversations with local authorities, and in my spare time, I actually chair my own council's climate emergency advisory board. So I see the problem firsthand. But when they're fighting the challenge of, keeping streets clean, social care, care in the community, all those sort of bits and pieces, trying to find time that they don't have to fix something for 1 or 2% of the demographic which seems at the high end and the wealthier end of the challenge spectrum, you can understand why councils didn't step forward, right? It's in the too difficult to do pot. So they were being given more to do and no funding to do so. That meant you got inconsistency across the country. Some councils found the time and resources to get involved, others didn't. So you end up with a patchwork, and that is really unhelpful, because what we need as EV drivers is consistency and continuity, right? There's no point in not being able to be, there are deserts of the bits of the country where there are just no chargers. And so that consistency and continuity is a problem. So I'm actually going to call out a bit of a thank you to government, because what they did is not only did they realize there was a problem, they realizes there needed to be an intervention, and then they've put more money behind it, which is kind of where the detail of the local infrastructure fund, I think, is really quite clever. So what they've done is not only put 450 million into a pot, but more importantly, and this is the bit that I think is clever, they've ring-fenced 50 million of that to actually be able to fund councils upskilling, finding a dedicated resource, paying for a consultant, bringing great people together to work on the solutions that can then apply for the funding. And that's the piece that I think people often miss, is they think that councils are reading from an instruction manual and can just do this. And people get frustrated that they don't. But the challenge we've also got here is the way the LEVI fund is going to work. And I'll give you the headlines, right? So it's primarily driven for on-street charging and rapid charging hubs, right? This is not going to help, Mr. and Mrs. private driveway with their own charger, right? We've been there and done that. It's also going to, what they're going to do is to try and pump prime this. They've allocated 10 million of that fund to a handful of projects, to almost like pilot projects, to almost stimulate the art of the possible. It's really easy to be a fast follower when you're copying something that's happening elsewhere. It's very difficult to innovate in this space. So I'm quite pleased that there's some early movement on sort of, they reckon 3 to 8 projects that can access this 10 million fund. Then the rest of the 440 million is going to deliver charging infrastructure between now and 2025. So the important thing for me is there's a lot of discussion around, there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. Well, getting stuff off the ground and money paid and stuff built in the next 3 years, actually, it may feel like three years. Why is that so long? Hang on, that's really short in investment cycles. That's really short in infrastructure deployment. And also what's nice about the fund is they're trying to drive this through a consortium. So, my pet hate is, or my pet mantra is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. This should not be about one party delivering one thing for one demographic. What they're actually saying is it should be led by a local authority, but what they're really interested in is partnerships and consortia, right? So bring groups of people together for that wider benefit. So what that leads me on to then is I really hope that this isn't going to be solely for one type of charge point, one type of refueling, one type of vehicle. Because if we're only fixing for one type, I'd argue that we'd kind of failed, right? Because what we need is all transport to go clean and green. So I know Paul's pet hate is everybody talks about cars, no one talks about vans. So this is a shout out to vans, right? At the moment, what we're seeing in my local town is a bum fight every evening for the pod point charger in my local Tesco. And each night, does the DPD driver win or does the DHL driver win? Because these poor drivers don't have a driveway. So they're reliant on public charging. And so if the fund only fixes for cars, I would argue that it is under-delivered. So, and then that was, I guess, my final point, and then we can open to debate, because I don't profess to be an expert in the finer detail, and I can post up the link for all the details. But what it needs is collaboration between those who think about transport, those who think about environment, those who think about use case, but also please, please, please think about the underlying infrastructure. Some people start with location and try and pull the grid to the location. That's expensive. Other people think about where is the grid and bring vehicles to where the grid is strong. So all I'd say is there is no one right or wrong answer, but hopefully these collective consortia should bring the mixture of the right people to give us fast, usable, deployable, and overall moving the dial on the right answer. And again, talked about vans, do talk about trucks as well. Most of the trucking stuff will be returned to base. That's great, and that might need some help from this fund. But what if that infrastructure, whilst the vehicles are not there, whilst they're out on rounds delivering, why can't that be used for another demographic of vehicle that can share the most expensive thing, which is the grid infrastructure? So anyway, I'm going to stop at that point. I'm going to cut and paste the link to a fairly wordy document and the criteria. I'm going to chuck it into chat. The devil will be in the detail, but what's nice is there is help, right? So the Energy Saving Trust, Cenex, and what they've also done is I would guess brought in some professional services as well to help navigate the ask for the fund. Back in the day, it was almost cost you as much to get the money as it was the value of the money that you got, right? It was hard work and heavy. So they've got a bunch of the right people. Energy Saving Trust is brilliant. Cenex, really, really great bunch of people there. And then PA Consulting, just to actually help navigate the finer detail to access that funding. So anyway, I'm going to shut up at that point. I'm sure it'll stimulate a bunch of debate, and we'll go from there. Paul, back to you.
Well, I am interested because the LEVI fund, it talks about this 450 million and stuff, but when the government announced the recent, the recent announcements came out, they talked about 1.6 billion. Was kind of one of the headlines, and I know that included the rapid charge fund. Is that are they sort of one and the same, or how are they separated and differentiated?
Oh, well, so let's do two things. So, I started out by actually this was government realizing there was a failure and then putting something in to try and fix that. Well, the Project Rapid Fund is exactly the same mentality, right? See a problem, try and find a fund to fix it. So they're very different in how they deliver. So the Rapid Charging Fund is only for the underlying grid infrastructure. It's got nothing to do with charge points. It's got nothing to do with chargers. It's the underlying grid infrastructure, because that's the mode of market failure. The charging market is very, very competitive. Whereas what the LEVI fund is trying to do is acknowledging that not everybody has a driveway, not everybody has the luxury of charging from home. So it is much more focused around public charging. It's much more focused around street charging or hubs. Because don't forget, the jury's out. Some people believe that it'll only work if you only have curbside. Others are putting their money in it only works if you have hubs. I'm a firm believer in actually, we kind of need everything, right? And it's each individual's personal use case will decide what they choose. And so, we know that the market economics around curbside charging, is a little difficult, right? There's quite a lot of street works. It's a little more difficult to deploy. And also, don't forget, street-based stuff, you're not able to recoup some of your money from a targeted priced coffee or a targeted price sandwich whilst you're waiting to charge, right? So there's not additional revenue streams. So I think it's trying to do the right thing and try and fix for those that there isn't an obvious fix out there yet. So but what's nice is that overall mentality, government intervening, but not telling you what the answer is, just realizing there needs to be some sort of fiscal stimulus, which I think is actually quite progressive.
Helpful. Thank you, Graeme.
This is where we have a tumbleweed moment where no one has any questions or nobody has any comments.
There's plenty of questions.
All right, okay.
Go on, John. Loads of questions. Alec Peachy makes a really interesting point, and he talks about the new LEVI funding and says it's welcome and will enable local authorities to deliver EV charging points for their area. But this needs to be done in a way that ensures wide coverage of charging infrastructure across the UK to address the current geographic imbalance in provision. Agree, Graeme?
I violently agree. This either works for everyone or it works for no one, right? Because you could even have the argument, right, that if it works in an area, it works for those people, but they travel elsewhere, right? People move freely. Social mobility is really critical for your own mental health, safety, workplace, families. Mobility is really, really important. The one thing I guess there's a couple of things that I observe is the fund at the moment is England. So we've already got an inconsistency there. However, those who don't know, there is a mechanism whereby Wales and Scotland will, through the Barnett, it's called the Barnett formula if you want to Google it, they will get a share of an equivalency. The problem, I guess, the problem opportunity is those entities, both Scottish Government and Welsh Assembly Government, don't have to spend the money in the same way on the same things for the same rules. So that's good in which they can interpret it in the same way, but it doesn't guarantee that the same funding is fixing the same problem. So the one thing, I guess, bearing in mind National Grid is obviously a national entity, I appreciate that you need driver from Westminster that says we need to do this across the UK. It really needs to be interpreted locally, because nowhere's the same as London, nowhere's the same as Westminster. But at the same time, I guess my plea would be, can we just make sure that there's a level of consistency and continuity? Because my other pet hate is what we need is people to have confidence that they can go anywhere and see something similar. You know, I think those of us who obviously, you know, we've all grown up with petrol and diesel cars. You can pretty much get in the car and drive anywhere, and you kind of know that you'll probably find a petrol or diesel stop somewhere on an A road, somewhere close to a town. So we don't even have to think about it. We have that confidence. How do we replicate that across the rest of the country? If I jumped in the car today and went to Yorkshire, because I see Paul has got his Yorkshire cap on, he's doing his bit for, you know, regional levelling up. You know, I'd love to be able to just go and not have to think about charging it. At the moment, I have to plan for that. But wouldn't it be good if charging was at least broadly consistent? It doesn't have to be the same. Deployment doesn't have to be the same, but it needs to, you know, you need to be able to have that confidence and continuity, so that builds confidence.
And the other thing that it needs to be, Graeme, is reliable. I guess it needs to work. And Mark Hallows says, when do you think the standard will be delivered by government to ensure a quality of service? With the money that's...
I know the answer. I know the answer to that, John. John, I know the answer. I know the answer. I know the answer. So my understanding, and again, don't forget, I'm not government, but I keep my ear to the ground. The legislation around the charger reliability, I believe, is being laid in Parliament in June. It should become law in June. Okay. I don't know the detail of that, but a little bird tells me that June is when there's a flurry of legislation that's due.
This is good news.
Breaking news.
Yes, but don't forget, it's likely to be with legislation. It doesn't look backwards; it only looks forwards. So it will be anything deployed from a date. However, if you are a responsible charging point operator, why would you have a two-tier system? Unreliable stuff installed before a date, and then ultra reliable stuff after a date. You know, and the learning from making stuff reliable in the new will help you retrofit and improve the reliability of the old, right? So it should bring the whole level up. But I believe, don't know for certain, that June is about when we're likely to see this legislation. Fingers crossed.
Excellent.
I'd actually like to suggest, Graeme, that we do some replace and remove rather than repair in many instances, because there's lots of tens of thousands of charge points out there, and so many of them actually are pins which are a pain rather than a help. So it's not just about upgrading; it's about replacing or removing the ones that just are not fit for purpose or are no longer in the right areas.
Sarah, you patiently had your hand up.
Sorry, Sarah. Sorry.
It actually wasn't very patient. I was like so excited. I just couldn't keep putting it up in the air. But it's just to say that, as you know, I've spent a lot of time either working for or with local authorities. So this news was just the best thing. And actually, Transport and Energy ran a really cool podcast last week with the REA and me, and we were talking about the benefits of this scheme. But I also took the time to speak to Lloyd Allen, who is quite senior within the West of England Combined Authority. And we were discussing how this feels, because obviously it's government should do it all the time. And this one's really there to help sort of curbside charging and off-street charging and rapid charging, rather than Mrs. Jones, who really wants a charge point at their house and can't have one. So really exciting to see it. But the best thing, we unanimously agreed, the two best things: revenue. It's got revenue in it. So you can actually pay to maintain the chargers rather than just having them sat there and you having to find the revenue from your business as usual fund, which is virtually impossible. And then the second thing was that procurement. So the procurement portal has become more flexible, it's become bigger, there's a greater opportunity within there to collaborate. But there was a slight problem that got exposed. Maybe someone can help us with this. It seemed to imply that for AC charging, anything 7, 11 or 22 would need to have a contactless option. And it was really ambiguous how it was worded. And the point of that is, whilst we've got this widening of procurement, we also may have a slight narrowing of procurement because there's not very many AC chargers out there that take contactless technology. So that was a really, really strange one. And then I guess the other one was staff. Finally, this fund can cover expert staff to come in and support the rollout of this charging infrastructure. So all in all the problems we've always had, or all the reasons we've been able to get on our soapboxes, is kind of been taken away. But the proof will be in the pudding, and I just hope we don't see sort of mini monopolies happening where people buddy up and then it's a swathe of the same charger. I want to see different CPOs in the same area, because people are creatures of habit. We have preferences. So I'm hoping the local authorities would appreciate that, understand that, and that the private sector can help them to find products that everyone can work with.
So a big thank you to you, Graeme. It's always, as always, it's great to listen to you. Don't worry, he's not going anywhere. So if you have any more questions, then please put them in the Q&A tab and we'll get them answered for you later on in the show. But let's try and make the most of his time.
Apologies to Mark Hallows, who we didn't get time to. Thank you for your active involvement in the chat, but we didn't get a chance to speak to you today.
Next time.
Next time
we'll get you on.
18th of May, everybody. 18th of May for the next session. Watch out on our LinkedIn page, follow our YouTube channel and Instagram and everything else to keep in touch with everything that is going on at the EV Cafe.
And the